The wind howled through the dry trees surrounding Pine Hollow Cemetery in rural Vermont. Tucked away on an isolated hilltop, the cemetery was overlooked by even the oldest residents. Weathered stone headstones stuck out like broken teeth from the damp, muddy ground, while bare tree branches cast ghostly shadows in the moonlight. Elliot Carter, a young freelance journalist, parked his old pickup truck at the bottom of the hill. He didn't believe the rumors, but he was determined to investigate the legend for a story that could boost his career. With a flashlight in one hand and a camera in the other, he faced the steep path to the cemetery. As he climbed, he felt a presence that he couldn't explain. Each step was accompanied by a rustle among the leaves, although there was not enough wind to move the branches. When he finally passed through the rusty gates, Elliot went still. He felt a cold breeze on the back of his neck, but there was no one there. And before we continue with this intriguing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us bring more content like this to you. Now let's get back to the story. Come on, Elliot, you've faced stranger situations, he whispered to himself, trying to shake off the growing discomfort. The local Vermont newspaper had hired him to investigate the Guardian mystery. Reports indicated that a monstrous figure appeared at night, guarding the cemetery. Some described a creature with glowing eyes and almost human movements. Others, just an immense, nebulous figure. The article was perfect to attract readers, but also to prove how exaggerated small-town stories could be. Elliot, always skeptical, believed that shadows and collective fear had generated the rumors. However, the more he explored the cemetery, the more it seemed like something was watching him. Among weathered tombstones and fallen crosses, he found a mausoleum inscribed Harper Family, 1847. There was a hole in the side wall, big enough for something, or someone, to fit through. He brought the flashlight closer, illuminating the dark interior and smelling mold and wet earth. It was then that he heard the sound. A low, guttural growl coming from behind a nearby tombstone. Elliot froze. "Who's there?" His voice sounded firmer than he expected. The growl turned into a snarl, followed by the sound of claws scratching stone. He backed away, looking for the camera to record, but the flashlight started to fail. In the next instant, he saw something. The creature had glowing yellow eyes and a silhouette that oscillated between a tall man and something non-human, covered in a kind of dense fog. As he took a step forward, Elliot could hear the heavy sound of his paws touching the ground. There was no doubt he was not human. Suddenly, a soft voice, almost a whisper, filled the space around. "Why are you here, human? This is the territory of the dead." Elliot swung the flashlight around, trying to find the speaker, but he saw no one other than the creature. He took a deep breath, ignoring his racing heart. "I'm investigating the truth. I need to know what you are." The creature tilted its head, as if assessing his intentions, and then he disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the echo of a deep, dark laugh. Elliot barely had time to react when he heard something behind him. Suddenly, a firm hand grabbed his shoulder. He turned around abruptly, his breath catching in his throat. He was an elderly man, with tired but razor-sharp eyes. He wore a shabby coat and a worn hat, looking as out of place as the cemetery itself. "You shouldn't be here, kid," the man said, his voice thick with authority. "It's dangerous." Elliot backed away, still trying to compose himself. "Who are you? What was that?" Pointed to where the creature was, but the fog had swallowed the place. The man watched the young journalist for a moment, then gave a short laugh. "My name doesn't matter, but if you want to live, go away and forget what you saw." "I can't do this," Elliot insisted. "I need to know the truth." The man narrowed his eyes and sighed. "The truth," he murmured, pointing to the mausoleum. "Be careful what you look for. Sometimes the truth can bury you alive." Before Elliot could ask any more questions, the man simply disappeared into the darkness as if he had never been there. Elliot was left alone, surrounded by oppressive silence. He knew he should leave, but something was pulling him deeper into the cemetery. Something about that place cried out to be discovered, and as he took another step forward, he didn't realize that he was being watched by eyes that seemed to shine like stars on a moonless night. The darkness seemed thicker with every step Elliot took. He felt like the cemetery was alive somehow, as if the tombstones and the twisted branches and even the wind were conspiring to push him back. But curiosity consumed him. The creature he had seen and the elderly stranger who had disappeared like a ghost left more questions than answers. His flashlight flickered, making the surrounding shadows even more menacing. Elliot barely realized he was heading toward the center of the cemetery, where a huge tombstone stood like a lonely monolith. It was decorated with inscriptions almost erased by time and surrounded by rusty chains. It looked like an altar, and the air around it was even heavier. He stopped in front of her and ran his hand over the inscriptions, trying to decipher the names engraved on the stone. Here lie the Harpers, defenders of Pine Hollow secrets. Ah, defenders. Secrets. Elliot felt a shiver run down his spine. It was clear that this cemetery was not just an ordinary resting place for the dead. He needed to understand what was protected there. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. It was a cry, faint, barely noticeable, but clearly that of a child. Elliot swung the flashlight around, trying to locate the source. "Who's there?" he shouted, his tone now mixing determination and panic. The crying seemed to come from the mausoleum he had investigated earlier. He hesitated, but something in that childish voice pulled him there. He approached the side opening again, illuminating the interior. There was nothing but dust, cobwebs, and bones that looked like they belonged to small animals. As he was getting ready to leave, the crying stopped, and then a voice whispered in his ear, "You shouldn't be here." Elliot jumped back, spinning quickly. There was no one behind him. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps came from the opposite direction. He turned the flashlight toward the trees, where a figure began to emerge. It was the creature again, with its shining eyes and almost liquid movements, as if it were a shadow that had come to life. This time, she didn't seem so willing to disappear. You're disrespecting the limits." The creature's voice echoed, but it didn't come out of his mouth. It seemed to fill the space around it. "What are you?" Elliot asked, stepping back, but without losing his determination. "I am the Guardian, the Protector, he who maintains the balance between the living and the dead. And you are breaking that balance." The creature moved forward a little, and Elliot tripped, falling backwards onto the ground. As he tried to get up, the voice resounded again. "There are secrets that must remain buried, human. Leave before it's too late." But before the creature could do anything, the elderly man reappeared. He emerged from the shadows as a solid, sure figure, standing between Elliot and the monster. "That's enough, Guardian. He doesn't know the rules yet." The creature stopped, and for the first time seemed to hesitate. She backed away slowly like a cornered wolf. "You're putting yourself at risk, old man. Don't interfere again," he said, before disappearing into a black mist. Elliot tried to compose himself as the elderly man turned to him. "I told you to leave, but what was that?" Elliot shouted, his voice echoing through the cemetery. "What's going on here?" The elderly man sighed, his expression heavy. "The Guardian is an ancient creature, a link between this place and the living world. He protects the secrets of Pine Hollow and ensures that the dead remain at peace. But this has a price." Elliot's eyes widened, his journalistic interest completely ignited. "What are these secrets?" The man hesitated, but then pointed to the headstone Elliot had examined earlier. "The Harper family. They have sworn to protect something that has been buried here for generations, something that should not be discovered." "And what is it?" Elliot pressed. The elderly man was silent for a moment before responding. "The curse of Pine Hollow." Elliot's blood ran cold. Without warning, the wind began to howl again, this time stronger. The surrounding trees seemed to groan, and the ground shook slightly. "You woke him up," the elderly man said, his voice now full of concern. "The Guardian realized that you are not going to stop, and he won't rest until he makes sure you don't go too far. I won't give up. I need to know what's buried here, Elliot shouted, determined. The elderly man held him by the arm, his gaze more penetrating than ever. Then prepare yourself for the consequences. Because once you cross that line, there is no going back. The ground beneath his feet began to crack slightly, and the sound of claws scratching stone echoed through the cemetery again. Elliot knew something big was about to happen. The elderly man took a step back, leaving him in front of the Harper family tomb. You want answers, boy, so go ahead. But remember, discovering the truth may cost more than you are willing to pay. Elliot picked up the shovel that the elderly man threw at his feet. He hesitated for a moment, but then stuck the tool into the ground, starting to dig. From the top of a nearby tree, two yellow eyes watched him intently. The sound of the shovel cutting into the ground was muffled by the growing wind that now carried a strange, almost human wail. Elliot felt the tension build with each movement, as if the cemetery itself was resisting his actions. The elderly man watched from a distance, arms crossed, with a serious expression. You shouldn't be doing this, kid, he said, his hoarse voice almost swallowed by the wind. I've heard that before, Elliot replied, panting, but no one gives me answers. As he dug, his flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding tombstones. He finally hit something solid. The shovel hit with a hollow sound like ancient wood. Elliot knelt, brushing away the dirt with his hands until he revealed the lid of a coffin. But it was no ordinary coffin. The wood was marked with intricate symbols, which seemed to pulse beneath his fingers, emitting a faint glow. In the center was an iron clasp with an inscription, sealed to protect. Never open. Elliot hesitated. What is that? He asked without turning around. The elderly man approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the coffin. It's the reason the Guardian exists, he replied, his voice thick with fear. Something that should never have been created. Before Elliot could process the words, the ground shook violently. A crack opened near the tomb, exhaling cold, heavy air that seemed to drain the strength from his limbs. Then the Guardian appeared again. This time he was bigger, more defined. The hazy form gave way to a solid body, with long, muscular arms, sharp claws, and a grotesque face that combined human and bestial features. I warned you to stop! The creature roared, its voice reverberating like thunder. Elliot backed away, falling onto his back, but didn't let go of the flashlight or the shovel. If this is so dangerous, why did they bury it here? Why didn't they destroy it? He shouted, trying to maintain his courage. The Guardian stepped forward, his yellow eyes burning like embers. Because there are things that cannot be destroyed, just contained. I don't believe it, Elliot replied, his voice shaking. There is always an explanation. There is always a truth. The elderly man shook his head, regretting the young man's stubbornness. True, repeated the Guardian, his voice permeated with mockery. Then look for yourself. With a movement, the creature pointed at the coffin. The lid began to quiver as if something inside was alive, responding to the Guardian's invisible touch. Elliot, against his better judgment, crawled back into the grave. His fingers hesitated over the iron clasp. He felt the Guardian's penetrating gaze and the elderly man's heavy breathing, who muttered prayers in a low voice. Don't do that, boy! You don't understand what you are about to release, shouted the old man. But curiosity won. Elliot turned the clasp. The lid opened with a loud pop and golden light gushed from within, illuminating the entire cemetery. For a moment, Elliot couldn't see anything but the blinding light. Then he saw it. Inside the coffin, there was not a body but a strange object, a metallic artifact that looked like a mixture of a mirror and a blade. Its edges glowed with ancient runes, and a pulsating energy radiated from its surface. Is this what you were protecting? Elliot murmured, reaching out to touch him. Before he could reach the artifact, the Guardian roared, advancing with impossible speed. His claws closed around Elliot's arm, holding him in place. You can't touch him, shouted the creature, his voice full of despair. The elderly man ran towards the tomb, trying to intervene. "Guardian, stop! He doesn't know what he's doing." The creature hesitated for a moment, but didn't let go of Elliot. "You don't understand," said the Guardian, his eyes fixed on the elderly man. "If he touches this artifact, everything we have held back for generations will be released." "What is contained?" Elliot asked, his voice cracking. The Guardian let out a low growl, and for a moment it looked like it wouldn't respond. But then he spoke, his voice softer, almost melancholy. "A curse, not just from this place, but from around the world." Elliot blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means that if the artifact is activated, it will open a portal," explained the Guardian. "A portal that will bring back beings that should never exist." Suddenly, the artifact began to glow even more brightly. It was as if he was reacting to Elliot's presence. He struggled against the Guardian's grip, but something seemed to draw him towards the object. "What is happening?" he shouted. The elderly man knelt beside the grave, pressing his hands against the ground. "You woke him up, boy. He's responding to your curiosity, to your restless soul. Now it's too late." The Guardian let go of Elliot and stepped back, his features showing a mixture of frustration and resignation. "He is the chosen one." Elliot felt his blood run cold. Chosen for what? To release the curse or destroy it. The artifact began to emit a pulsating sound, almost like a beating heart. The Guardian took a step back, while the elderly man muttered more prayers. Elliot, caught between fear and curiosity, felt his hands move almost unwillingly towards the shiny object. And when his fingers finally touched it, a wave of energy threw him back. Light exploded, engulfing the cemetery and everything around it. Elliot felt his body being tossed like a leaf in the wind. The explosion of light enveloped him, completely blinding him. When he opened his eyes, he realized he was lying on the cold ground, but the cemetery had changed. Now the tombstones were intact, as if they had never been touched by time. The surrounding trees bloomed with vibrant green leaves, and the sky, once heavy and grey, glowed a crystal blue hue. But there was something deeply wrong: the silence. It was not just the absence of natural sounds, but an oppressive silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "Where am I?" Elliot muttered, getting up with difficulty. All around him, the environment seemed to be the same cemetery, but a strange feeling of dislocation made him question everything. He saw the artifact lying next to him, still emitting a faint glow, but it looked different, less threatening. "You crossed the line, boy." The elderly man's voice echoed behind him. Elliot turned around quickly. The man was there, but his appearance had changed. He looked younger, with an upright posture and a look that radiated authority. "What happened?" Elliot asked, panting. The elderly man walked towards him with deliberate steps. "You opened the portal," he said, his voice full of gravity. "Welcome to the threshold between the worlds." Elliot blinked, confused. Threshold? What worlds? The man pointed to the artifact on the ground. This object was created centuries ago to contain what we call the First, creatures that inhabited the earth before humans and were banished for destroying everything around them. This cemetery was built to protect you, but you... He paused, assessing Elliot. "You ruined the balance." Before Elliot could respond, mist began to rise from the tombstones. She seemed to move with purpose, crawling toward the artifact. The elderly man took a step back, his gaze fixed on the fog. "It's the beginning," he murmured. The mist began to condense into distinct shapes, revealing grotesque-looking humanoid figures. Their bodies were translucent, but their eyes glowed like hot coals. One of them, larger and more imposing, came forward, facing Elliot. "Who dares to free us?" The creature growled, its voice reverberating like thunder. Elliot tried to speak, but his words died in his throat. The elderly man took a step forward, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. He didn't know what he was doing. There is still time to repair the error. The creature tilted its head as if analyzing the man. "Time?" she repeated, her voice full of sarcasm. You had centuries to destroy us, but you preferred to imprison us. Now, time belongs to us. Elliot took a step back, but felt something cold touch his ankle. It was the Guardian. He was lying on the ground, injured, his form wavering between human and beast. "Take the artifact," the Guardian whispered, his voice weak. "Use it, before it's too late." Elliot looked at the artifact, but his hands were shaking. "I don't know what to do." The elderly man turned to him, his tone urgent. "He's right. The artifact can seal them again, but you need to be quick." Elliot took the object with shaking hands. The moment his fingers touched the surface, he felt a wave of heat run through his body, as if the artifact were alive. "How do I use this?" he shouted as the creatures slowly advanced. The Guardian stood up with difficulty, leaning on a tombstone. "Focus. Think about what you want to protect." Elliot closed his eyes, but his mind was in chaos. He thought about the cemetery, the Harper story, the Guardian's words, and what the old man had said about balance. "Protect. I need to protect what's left." The artifact began to glow brightly, emitting a high-pitched sound. The creatures retreated momentarily, but the largest of them laughed. "Do you think you can stop us with that?" she mocked, taking a step forward. Elliot felt the weight of the artifact increase, as if it was draining his energy, but he held on tight, pointing it in the direction of the creatures. "I won't let you escape!" he shouted, his voice echoing with a strength he didn't know he had. A wave of light exploded from the artifact, hitting the creatures squarely. They screamed, trying to resist, but they began to disintegrate in the light. The largest of them tried to move forward, but was pulled back by an invisible force. "This isn't over yet, human," she roared before disappearing. When the light finally dissipated, the cemetery was silent again. Elliot fell to his knees, exhausted as the artifact faded in his hands. The Guardian approached slowly, now in his completely human form. He looked at Elliot with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "You did it, but the cost was high." Elliot looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" The elderly man answered for him. "You sealed the portal, but the balance was broken. And now you are part of it." "Part of that?" Elliot repeated, feeling a chill. "You are the new Guardian." Elliot's blood ran cold. Elliot froze when he heard the elderly man's words. "Guardian? No, that can't be true," he shouted, looking at the now extinguished artifact in his hands. The elderly man approached, placing a firm hand on Elliot's shoulder. "You touched the artifact, used its energy to seal the portal. Now it's linked to him. It's not a choice, it's a destination." The original Guardian, still in his human form, leaned against a nearby tombstone, watching with tired eyes. "That's why I told you to leave. Being the Guardian is not a title. It's a curse." Elliot felt anger bubble up inside him. "I didn't ask for this. All I wanted was to find out the truth. And the truth always has a price," replied the Guardian, his voice dark. Before Elliot could protest, the ground around the cemetery began to shake again. Small cracks opened, and a low murmur, like hundreds of voices whispering at once, echoed through the air. "What is happening now?" Elliot asked, panic rising in his voice. The elderly man looked around, his expression hardening. "When you sealed the portal, you didn't destroy the connection to the other side. This means that as long as the artifact exists, creatures will try to escape again. Then I should destroy it," Elliot shouted, lifting the artifact. The Guardian stepped forward, his expression alarmed. "No! If you try to destroy it, you might open the portal once and for all." "So what do I do?" Elliot asked, desperate. The elderly man responded calmly. "You keep your balance. You become the Guardian and protect this place, just as he did before you." Elliot looked at the Guardian, who now seemed more fragile, his form wavering as if he was about to disappear. "And what happens to him?" Elliot asked. The Guardian gave a short, humorless laugh. "I finally rest. For more than a century I was responsible for this place. Now it's your turn." "A century?" Elliot repeated, horrified. The Guardian nodded slowly. "The weather here is different. You can live a normal life outside the confines of the cemetery, but you will always be called back when the balance is threatened. The elderly man crossed his arms, watching Elliot carefully. You have difficult choices ahead of you, boy. But there's something you need to understand. If you leave this place, the world will pay the price. Elliot felt the weight of the words like a ton. He looked at the artifact in his hands, feeling the latent power pulse even in its apparent dormancy. I don't know if I can do this, he murmured. The Guardian took a step towards him, his expression softening. You are not alone. I also thought the same when I was chosen. But you will find strength, and who knows? Maybe you'll achieve what I never could. What is it? Elliot asked hesitantly. A way to end this once and for all. Suddenly the Guardian began to glow with a golden light, similar to that of the artifact. He looked down at his hands, his body now translucent. It's time, he said with a sigh of relief. Before Elliot could say anything, the Guardian disappeared, leaving only a light breeze in the air. The elderly man looked at the young journalist, who was now alone with the artifact. That's it, boy. The weight is now yours. But why me? Elliot asked, his voice thick with frustration and fear. The elderly man gave a sad smile. Maybe because you're stubborn enough to never give up. Elliot didn't know what to answer. He looked around at the now silent cemetery and then at the artifact in his hands. What if I don't accept this? He asked. The elderly man shrugged. Then everything you've done so far will have been in vain. Elliot stood still, staring at the dark sky that was now lit up with the first lights of dawn. He felt the gravity of his new reality completely envelop him. It wasn't a choice he'd made, but it was a responsibility he couldn't ignore now. I accept, he said finally, his voice firm. The elderly man nodded, satisfied. Then go, Guardian. The world may not know, but it's up to you now. Elliot placed the artifact in his backpack and began walking down the hill, feeling the elderly man's gaze on his back. When he turned to look again, the man was gone, like a shadow in the wind. As he walked to his car, Elliot knew his life would never be the same. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. The balance was up to him now. The truck's engine roared as Elliot descended the hill leading out of Pine Hollow. The cemetery was no longer visible in the rearview mirror, but the presence of that place seemed engraved in his mind, like a shadow he would never be able to escape. The artifact was secure in his backpack on the passenger seat, but its energy pulsed faintly, a constant reminder of his newly assumed responsibility. Each beat seemed to whisper promises and warnings at the same time. The Guardian, he muttered to himself, trying to assimilate the weight of those words. The tall trees along the road created a tunnel of shadows, and the sky was now brightening with the first rays of sunlight. Elliot felt tiredness taking over his body, but he couldn't stop. He needed to go back to his home, to his life, if he could still call it life. Arriving at his small home in Burlington, Vermont, Elliot threw his backpack on the couch and sat down at the kitchen table. Everything around him seemed ordinary. The electric kettle, the pile of papers and notes on unfinished stories, the distant sound of the radio still on. But he knew that nothing was the same as before. Taking a notepad, he began to write frantically, trying to organize his thoughts. He detailed every moment since his arrival at the cemetery, from his encounter with the Guardian to the explosion of light that sealed the portal. As he was writing, he noticed something curious. Some pages started to change on their own. The ink of the words he had just written seemed to transform, reconfiguring themselves into symbols that resembled those on the Harper's coffin. Elliot dropped the pen, startled. "What is happening?" he whispered, while the pages of the notebook shook slightly. The light in the kitchen flickered, and a faint murmur filled the air. He felt the same chill he had felt in the cemetery, as if something or someone was watching him. The artifact, still in the backpack, began to glow again. Elliot hesitantly approached and unzipped. The golden light was less intense than before, but enough to cast unsettling shadows on the walls. As he touched the object, he heard a familiar voice. Guardian was the former protector of the cemetery. Elliot swallowed. "Didn't you rest? I thought you left." My time is up, but my essence will remain in the artifact as long as you need it. You must learn to listen and protect." "Listen to what?" Elliot asked, frustrated. "I don't understand any of this." The Guardian's voice became quieter, almost like a whisper. "Listen to the dead. They will whisper secrets and dangers, but be careful. They also lie." Before Elliot could ask any more questions, the light from the artifact disappeared, leaving him alone again. He fell heavily into the chair, running his hands through his hair. He had no idea how to fulfill his role or what it meant to listen to the dead. His mind was flooded with doubts, but one thing was clear. He could not ignore the call. Over the next few weeks, Elliot tried to get back into his routine. He wrote articles and did research for his journalism career, but it all seemed pointless. The artifact was a constant presence in his life, and he often felt its energy pulsing like a silent reminder. Then one night, as he was reviewing his notes about Pine Hollow, he heard something. It was a faint sound coming from the backpack where the artifact was stored. A voice, distant and distorted, repeated the same words, "Don't trust the blood." Elliot took the artifact, squeezing it tightly. "What does that mean?" he asked aloud. The answer came in flashes of images: the cemetery, the Harper's tombstones, the mausoleum, and finally a woman standing in clothes from another era, looking directly at him. "You're not safe," she said, before disappearing. The following days were filled with increasingly strange events. Objects in his house moved, shadows moved in the corners of his eyes, and he often woke up with the feeling that someone was standing next to his bed, watching him. And then came the message he couldn't ignore. A letter, delivered without a return address, was on his desk when he woke up. The paper was old, the text written in firm black ink. "The balance has been broken. Find the Harper descendant before they find you first." Elliot held the letter, feeling the weight of the implied threat. He knew he needed to act, but he had no idea where to start. He returned to Pine Hollow. The cemetery seemed quieter than ever, but there was a different energy in the air, something he hadn't noticed before. As he walked among the tombstones, he felt the presence of the woman he had seen in the vision. It appeared again, this time clearer, floating like a spectre. "Why me?" Elliot asked, his voice shaking. "Because you were chosen to face what the Harpers have protected for generations," she replied. "But be careful, Elliot. Not everyone wants you to succeed." Before he could ask further, the woman disappeared, leaving him alone again. Back at the center of the cemetery, Elliot faced the Harper's tomb, and the tombstone marked with the words, "Defenders of Pine Hollow's Secrets." He put his hand over the cold stone and murmured to himself, "If I'm really the Guardian, I need to understand what that means." The moment his words echoed in the air, a new crack opened on the ground, revealing a staircase that descended into the depths. Elliot looked at the hole with a mixture of fear and determination. He knew there was no return. With the artifact in hand, he began to descend, each step taking him deeper into the secrets that the dead had promised to keep forever. The staircase seemed endless, illuminated only by the weak glow of the artifact that Elliot held firmly. The walls were made of ancient stone, marked with symbols that he began to recognize as variations of the same, seen in the Harper coffin. The air was dense and heavy, impregnated with a metallic smell that made her shivering skin. Finally, he reached what it seemed to be the bottom. Before him was a large stone door, intricately carved, with two circular carvings that resembled locks. In the center of the door, a text in Latin was recorded, "Only the one who carries the burden of the living and the dead can pass." Elliot frowned, running his hand over the words. "Carry the burden," he murmured. As he lifted the artifact, he realized that the carvings at the door had the same shape as the edges of the object. Reluctant, he fitted the artifact in the circles. A mechanical sound echoed through the walls, followed by a strong tremor. The door opened slowly, revealing a gigantic room, illuminated by a golden light that seemed to emanate from the ceiling. In the center, a pedestal supported a huge book, bound in dark leather and decorated with the same symbols that marked the artifact. Elliot approached cautiously. The pages of the book opened alone, as if guided by an invisible force. The first page showed the same text recorded on the door, followed by a detailed map of the cemetery and surroundings. But it was the second page that made Elliot hold his breath. In it was his name, written in gold ink, Elliot Carter, the last guardian. The last one, he murmured, feeling a chill. Before I could process the meaning of this, a voice echoed through the room. "You shouldn't be here." Elliot turned quickly, staring at the figure that had appeared at the entrance. He was a tall and thin man, with deeply black eyes and a threatening aura. He wore old-style clothes, but his presence was incredibly intense. "Who are you?" Elliot asked, instinctively retreating. "Someone who understands the true power of this place." The man stepped ahead with a cold smile. "And someone who won't allow you to control you." "Are you one of the Harper?" Elliot asked, squeezing the artifact. The man laughed, but his eyes showed no humor. "The Harper? No. They were only the first fools to try to stop the inevitable. But now, you are the next." He raised his hand, and the artifact began to shine intensely, as if it were torn from Elliot's hands. "You don't understand what you are doing," Elliot shouted, trying to resist. The man tilted his head. "I understand more than you will ever understand." Before it could react, the book in the pedestal shone intensely, and the room was taken by a wave of light. Elliot felt her body be pulled back, as if being torn off the floor. The man disappeared, and the book was closed with a resounding sound. When the light disappeared, Elliot was back on the surface, lying on the cemetery floor. The night had fallen, and the cold wind blew between the tombstone. He looked around, confused, but the artifact was still in his hands, shining weakly. "What happened?" he muttered to himself. The old man who had guided him before was no longer there, and the previous guardian had left. Elliot was alone, but knew her journey was far from over. He got up, looking at the starry sky. "If I'm the last guardian, I'll find a way to end it." As he walked toward the cemetery gate, he felt a new determination grow within him. He knew the way would be dangerous, but there was no choice. With the artifact in hand and the secrets of the Harper starting to reveal herself, Elliot left Pine Hollow, ready to face whatever she was lurking on the horizon. The Guardian's story was just beginning. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like to support our work. See you in the next video.